Alrighty guys, it is Qaaman here today, and I'm bringing you another debunking video, and this time I'm going to be debunking something a lot more subjective, as I've seen this article floating around for quite some time by Stephan Roget, which is called 16 Reasons Why Dragon Ball Sucks. Guys, I do not think there is 16 reasons why Dragon Ball sucks. I did not make that title. So before you dislike this video, guys, I am debunking an article. This is not my opinion. So without wasting any more time, let's get straight into this video. So the first thing that Stephan Roget points out is the Great Salyaman. The story arc of Goku's son Gohan was originally one of the best things about Dragon Ball Z. Gohan was the Carl Grimes of his day. For those of you who don't know, Carl Grimes is the son of Rick from The Walking Dead, transforming from an annoying whiner to a hardcore badass with his literally one-handed destruction of Cell. Gohan followed up all of his character development by quickly turning into one of the show's lamest characters. When he wasn't nerding it up in school, Gohan could be found patrolling the streets as the Great Salyaman, a vigilante with a practiced dance routine and one of the worst costumes in superhero history. Okay. This is something where I feel like Steven is missing the wackiness of Toriyama. Toriyama likes to make fun of himself a lot of times. And the Great Salyaman was supposed to be a gag parody on superheroes. So the fact that you're saying the Great Salyaman sucks is kind of silly, because Toriyama himself pretty much thinks it sucks, which is why he made it corny and so lame in its sense. That's the point. It's supposed to be lame to be funny. So that's already something I wanted to point out. And also to say really quickly here, the whole thing about talking about how Gohan used to be, you know, this badass kid and all of that stuff. One thing a lot of Dragon Ball fans might not realize, I used to be a Gohan fanboy, is that Gohan's character is not to be a fighter. Gohan was a fighter earlier on in his life because he was forced to by Piccolo, he was forced to by Goku, and then he was later forced to by the Supreme Kaiyan because Buu was raging everywhere. Gohan has never been a fighter by nature, and that's definitely been a misconception. Alright, so let's go on to the next one here, where there's so much filler. For all of its faults, Dragon Ball Z definitely provided fans with several moments of a dynamic plot, tense, and drama. Unfortunately, one of those major faults was the fact that the great moments were surrounded by insane amounts of filler material. Every event seemed stretched far beyond its natural limits by endless build-up and countless diversions to the main plot. Even worse were the episodes that were completely meaningless filler, like the time Goku got a driver's license with Piccolo, or the time everybody just went fishing. Not exactly what you tune in for when watching a battle-oriented anime. Okay, there is a lot of filler in Dragon Ball Z, but first things first is you gotta understand, Dragon Ball Z is an older anime, and back in that time, they had to create filler so that they could keep up with the pacing of the manga. Obviously, Super is completely different from Dragon Ball Z, where in fact the manga is actually behind where the anime is. That's funny enough, and because it only comes out once a month. And the thing that I want to point out is that I disagree when it says that there's so much filler that makes it bad. Kai fixed a lot of the filler issues, but one of the best things about Dragon Ball is that when we see in these filler episodes, we see a lot of the character interactions about them that we don't really get to see in other situations. Dragon Ball Super pointed this out when Vegeta went on vacation with Trunks and Bulma, when Goku and Piccolo got their license. What other type of episode could you have seen something like that? It's cool to see them interacting with their daily lives, and Dragon Ball has even better filler when you look at Goku training with Kami and Mr. Popo, or when Goku is traveling the whole world and, you know, going to villages and stuff, such as when he, you know, found the little girl Chao and her village was being terrorized by terror and plague. So I feel like Dragon Ball's filler actually improves the series in a lot of areas. Sometimes it just hurts it. Alright, moving on, only a few characters actually matter. Even among the characters that can fight, unimaginably dubbed fighters, only a few characters truly matter. Goku and the other Saiyans quickly outclass all of their former allies and rivals, with the possible exception of the Namekian Piccolo. A show set on Earth soon had essentially zero useful Earthling fighters. The Z fighters were the equivalent of an unbalanced football team where only a few key players matter and everyone else just tries not to get in the way. In the case of Krillin, they couldn't even do that. Okay, the football reference does have some validity to it. Yes, it's kind of like you have a star football team or even a star basketball team, where like you have one guy or maybe two players who are so much better than everybody else. You can kind of say like LeBron James and Kyrie Irving in the previous finals were like Goku and Vegeta, and everybody else was, you know, pretty much just support. But the thing that I wanted to put out here is Yes, only a few of the characters actually matter. But at the same time, that's kind of how Dragon Ball has always been. There have always been a few main characters that have always been dominated, and everybody else becomes a side character at some point. So for example, during the General Blue arc of Dragon Ball, Krillin was one of the more main characters, and then later on, Krillin kind of becomes a side character when you look at it during, you know, the King Piccolo arc, obviously because he was dead, and then later on in the Piccolo Jr. arc, and that kind of is what happens in Dragon Ball Z. Krillin was relevant during the Namek arc, and that was only because he was around. He wasn't really relevant in power. And the same thing with Piccolo. Piccolo was relevant in the Saiyan arc, somewhat through the Namek arc until he shows up. You know, obviously in the Android arc, he was, you know, relatable and useful to a certain point. And then the Buu Saga, he's pretty much useless. He's just a trainer. So Dragon Ball always uses characters, and once they're done with them, they throw them away. So I do think you're kind of wrong there, because the show just transitions characters. It doesn't just completely dump them. It moves on to the more important ones later on. Alright, dying permanently doesn't even matter because the afterlife is pretty sweet. Despite all its loopholes, some characters still manage to die and stay dead for a while. Even that wasn't much of a consequence. However, thanks to the establishment of one of fiction's most diverse afterlives, some of the potential afterlives in Dragon Ball Z of the Dragon Ball Z universe included a happy Cloud adventuring on a giant snake road, or training on King Kai's planet with a monkey and a talking cricket. Even their version of hell is relatively tame. Best of all, the afterlife is full of fighting tournaments, which just so happen to be the favorite thing of most of the show's characters. Dying might actually be better. Okay, this person is actually correct. Stephen, you're correct in saying the afterlife is not that bad in what it seems, but you're only applying this to Goku. Now, yes, obviously Goku's the main character, but what I think you need to mention here is that the afterlife is really important for a lot of the other characters too, especially all of the dead people. Remember, most people turn into spirits. Goku's just the exception. So the afterlife isn't as fun and dandy as you really think it is. It just happens to be for the main character, and that paints your perception of how the afterlife is for a whole. But you have to take in consideration the rules of the afterlife. Alright, dying doesn't matter. Characters do die frequently in Dragon Ball Z. The series' first story arc concludes with the death of Goku. Countless characters sacrifice themselves, and Krillin explodes like a dozen times. The show doesn't even bother with funeral scenes. However, because of the existence of the titular Dragon Balls, these wish-granting orbs summon the dragon Shenron, who can bring the dead back to life. There are two limitations to this loophole. The dragon cannot grant the same wish twice, and the dragon or the Dragon Balls themselves can be destroyed. The show completely avoided these limitations with the introduction of a second dragon who could grant the same wish twice, thus rendering everybody effectively immortal, even Krillin. I cannot disagree with this at all. This is 100% true. There is a problem with Dragon Ball where dying doesn't matter, which is why the Future Trunks arc was so good, because it made dying matter, because everybody couldn't just come back with the Dragon Balls. And when I'm saying the Future Trunks arc, I'm talking about in Super, and I'm talking about when Trunks came back, you know, obviously during the Android arc. So yes, I would definitely say dying does not matter in Dragon Ball. Can't argue that at all, and I'm sure you guys would agree. Alright, villains quickly become powerless. Dragon Ball Z opens with the arrival of Raditz, Goku's long-lost and incredibly powerful Saiyan brother. Despite it taking Goku and Piccolo a lot of effort to defeat Raditz, a feat they just barely managed, the second major antagonist to attack Earth carry out with them plantable Cybermen that are each as powerful as the one Raditz, and the Z Fighters take them down with ease, with the exception of Yamcha, of course. The villainous Frieza has an awe-inspiring power level of 1 million, but by the next story arc, he's easily dismantled by a brand new character from the future. Eventually, young children are able to beat once all-powerful foes like Cell and Frieza with one arm tied behind their backs. Each new phase of the story renders the threats of the past laughable, which makes it hard for the show to gain any sense of history. Alright, so there's some things here. Frieza's second form was the one that had a power level of 1 million. Goten and Trunks are a lot more powerful later on, as you see them holding their own with 18. But the thing that you gotta understand about Dragon Ball is that he's trying to make it seem like Dragon Ball is the only show that does this. And I'm not saying because it's not the only show that does it, it makes it right. But if you really think about it, yes, the Dragon Ball does have power scaling where the last villain is a joke. But at the same time, I have an example for you. If you expand the story, do you want to make the next villain obviously comparable to the last one? That would be boring. Perfect example. Let's go to the Buu arc. What if Deborah was the main villain of the Buu arc? and he was just as strong as Cell as they were pretty much implying. How boring would that be, that after 7 years, you fight a villain the exact same power level as Cell, and Goku and Vegeta in their Super Saiyan 2 forms could take him out? How boring would that be? It would just be easy. It's like, alright, well, you can just beat him and just move on. No. I mean, obviously, you have to make villains stronger to make it a lot more, you know, have the show have a lot more tension. So I think that was a bad point there. Alright, the useless side characters. Dragon Ball Z made an admirable attempt to carry over the majority of characters that were established in its precursor series, Dragon Ball. However, it didn't really make an effort to find anything meaningful for all of those characters to do. Dragon Ball Z involves fighters with the power to destroy worlds, yet tries to shoehorn in plots taking talking turtles, shape-shifting pigs, and Krillin. Totally normal human Bulma even accompanies the team to alien planet Namek, where she provides the essential service of the annoying Vegeta by getting into mortal danger. Most of these side characters' screen time revolves around them watching the more important characters to do stuff on television. This here is actually not a bad point, I just feel like it's incomplete. Yes, there are useless side characters, but as I said before, the way Dragon Ball works is that Toriyama, or the way the story goes, is that they maximize the usage of characters at a certain arc, and then later on when those characters are irrelevant, they make them side characters and gag characters. That's how it's always been. Bulma is pretty much the only character in Dragon Ball, outside of Goku of course, that has maintained her relevance since the very beginning of the series, because she was obviously the only one who was there at the very beginning of the series. Everybody else has kind of been thrown aside with the exception of Goku, of course, and she's kind of been the only one who dabbles because of her scientific inventions. So yes, the side characters do lose their value, but they transition over time to the more useful characters later on. The bad dubs. This one is only a problem in English-speaking countries, but is definitely something that hurts playback value of Dragon Ball Z. While later efforts were made to improve the dubbing, early North American ports of the anime were plagued with notoriously awful translations and voice acting. At best, these mistranslations were used to remove some questionable content from the original series. For the most part, they simply resulted in awkward dialogue. However, at their worst, the bad dubs resulted in some characters having their natures completely altered from their original Japanese counterparts. This is not false at all. It's extremely hard to even argue against this, and I'm trying to be unbiased to both sides. That is true. The original English dub did change a lot of things, you know, a very notorious example, and if you even want to go with the Ocean dub, when they said Bardock was a brilliant scientist, Goku's fighting against Frieza, and, you know, he's talking about, oh, your shoelaces are untied. And one thing that they also did a lot in the English dub is there's a lot of scenes where there was no talking at all, but they added dialogue. For example, if you watch the history of Trunks, when Gohan and Trunks were running away from the androids, and like Gohan was like holding Trunks when he was hiding behind that rock, and you see 17 and 18 talking, there was no dialogue at that point. 17 and 18 were just walking around, and then they just nuked the whole area. They didn't say anything and talk about all of that stuff. So yes, there are a lot of problems with the dub. I will say this though, I do think the dub did cater to the American audience, but at the same time, I think Dragon Ball was meant to be a hit regardless. If you had kept it Japanese, if you had Americanized it, it wouldn't have made a difference. Dragon Ball was set to be a hit, but there are a lot of bad dub changes, and they did change a lot of character motives and intentions, such as Goku, as they pretty much made him this super loving, amazing guy, and Goku is a good guy, but they kind of took away a lot of what Goku originally was supposed to be, in the fact that Goku's very selfish in some elements of trying to fight, when in fact, you know, he was trying to, you know, satisfy his Saiyan need instead of doing what's absolutely best at all moments. So yes, I will say that is true. Okay. It became a self-parody. In the end, Dragon Ball Z became a show in which ridiculousness grew exponentially as its characters' power levels. The things it was criticized for early on in its history soon became over-exaggerated and impossible to ignore. Did you think too much time and focus was put into powering up? Entire arcs were soon built around it. Thought that the ability to bring somebody back to life was a cop-out? Let's make that even easier. Was the sheer amount of training and preparation too much for you? The show invented the hyperbolic time chamber so that the characters could train for years while only a few days passed in the real world. In short, Dragon Ball Z became a self-parody. Yes, which is kind of a stupid point, because that's kind of what Toriyama has been. Toriyama likes to make parodies on himself. I don't think Stephan Roget, you know, and I'm not criticizing him personally because I don't know him, but he doesn't understand Toriyama. Toriyama is a self-parody of himself. He makes fun of himself and a lot of his own work. That's kind of the point. And as I said before, how are you going to advance the series if you're trying to keep everything the same over time? Do you want to keep Goku limited to flying on his Nimbus cloud and traveling the whole world to train? Or do you want to expand and make his training quicker and a lot more exponential so that he could fight guys even faster? It's actually improving the pace in a lot of ways. Now, yes, it's kind of ridiculous how much it does move at times, but increasing the pace actually moves along with the pacing of the show itself. So I completely disagree with that, and I definitely think he's not realizing Toriyama's own humor of himself. Alright, now this one here. Fusion caused a lot of plot holes. The whole concept of fusion in general was poorly handled. The fusion dance was overused and hard to be nerfed, and its replacement was the more powerful but apparently permanent application of magical earrings, which Dragon Ball Super kind of rewrote. These earrings were supposed to merge their uses permanently, leading to some difficult decisions, but every time a pair decided to fuse, they managed to get out with some convoluted plot twists. For example, Majin Blue's stomach acid miraculously reversed the permanent fusion process, which is not true, by the way. That's like a rumor about how that whole acid thing happened. There's a lot of theories about why they diffuse, and the fact of the matter is that the biggest fan theory that I would think makes sense is the fact that Vegito was the fusion using the Potara earrings, which is a complete metamorphosis of what the god's energy and a pure, I guess you could say godlike power was in those earrings. So when you mix him with Super Buu, and if you mix him with such an evil entity, that causes a rift which causes him to diffuse. That's a fan theory, it's not true, but that's obviously makes a lot more sense than obviously the whole thing with the stomach acid. Perhaps it was for the best that fusions lasted that long. When they did, things got very confusing. For instance, by the end of the series, Piccolo was technically 3 different people. He fused with his ancient counterpart Kami early in the series and later fused with fellow Namekian and Nail in order to take on Frieza. Try to watch Piccolo's scenes knowing that there are 2 other guys sitting around in his head all the time. It's just weird. Okay, yes, but the thing you gotta understand is Piccolo's fusion is different from the others. The way Piccolo's fusion is that the dominant party pretty much just takes on the knowledge and I guess you could say the memories of the previous counterpart that he's fusing with, but he's still himself. So it's pretty much Piccolo absorbing Nail and Kami. It's not like a complete fusion like those other characters. Piccolo's still Piccolo. He's just becoming, I guess more omnipotent with those other guys. So yes, you make a lot of decent points there. Yes, the fusion is confusing, but honestly, I would honestly say that is poor writing at some points. I just wanted to clarify this for some of you guys, but you do have some points there. Alright, things escalate too quickly. The tendency for former villains to quickly become obsolete is emblematic of one of the major flaws of the core of the Dragon Ball Z escalation. Everything in Dragon Ball Z escalates in a ridiculous exponential fashion. The over 9,000 meme refers to Goku's power level, which astonishes Vegeta and Nappa. One story arc later, we meet Frieza with a power level of 1,000,000. Soon afterwards, Goku and Vegeta each have children that were born with power levels well above that, which is not true. They were not born with power levels of 1,000,000. That's stupid. Even one of the coolest parts of the show, the Super Saiyan transformation, was rendered ridiculous by continually more powerful versions that came up whenever the plot demanded it. Alright, he's kind of regurgitating what he said before, so I don't think this really needs much explanation, but what I will say here about the Super Saiyan transformation is that yes, I do think the Super Saiyan forms have become ridiculous in the sense that you have Super Saiyan, Super Saiyan 2, Super Saiyan 3, Super Saiyan 4, Super Saiyan God, Super Saiyan God, Super Saiyan Blue, false Super Saiyan, legendary Super Saiyan. Yes, and all of that is a part of marketing because all those Super Saiyan forms add more types of toys that kids want to buy. That's the whole thing. So yes, it is silly, I will admit that, but a lot of that has to do with marketing. So yes, and also, the impact of, Toriyama trying to find new ways to add new things to the series. Alright, now this one here really pissed me off, guys. This one here. The fusion dance. Fans of Dragon Ball Z will no doubt remember the excitement that came with the notion of characters fusing. The idea that their favorite characters could combine with one another to form even more powerful fighters was so intoxicating, it spawned a still vibrant online trend of creating character mashups. Unfortunately, the process by which characters fused was incredibly goofy, consisting of an awkwardly stilted dance that culminated in dual fingertip touches, a fusion process that was undoubtedly led to countless school children getting beat up for replicating it. I completely think Stephan Roget, like Great Salyaman, missed the point here. The point of the fusion dance was so that it was a gag of itself. It was supposed to be a silly dance. That's why Piccolo thought it was silly. That's why Vegeta thought it was silly. That's why Krillin thought it was silly. That's why everybody thought it was a silly dance. That's the point. Toriyama was laughing at himself for coming up with that silly way of making people need it. That was the joke. The joke was that you have to do a silly dance to gain a lot of power. That was the joke in itself. So the fact that you're making fun of the show for making fun of itself is silly. That was the point they were trying to get at. So that I thought that was a horrible point. Alright, moving on to getting hurt doesn't matter. Another major flaw at the core of Dragon Ball Z is the complete lack of consequences for anything that happens. The characters fight vicious battles with amazing powers and sometimes suffer grievous injuries. However, they never really have to worry about it due to the existence of the senzu beans. These magical fruit, well, it's not really a fruit, but they don't make you toot, but they restore anything to perfect health no matter how badly wounded they are. It makes the whole thing seem like more of a live action roleplay than battles to the death. You have a point here, and I will say that what you missed on saying is you should have also talked about how villains also have this problem too in Dragon Ball, where if you look at, you know, with the exception of Frieza's tail, because Frieza's tail was the only thing that regenerated, you know, if you look at, you know, Piccolo, if you look at, you know, when he was a villain, if you look at, you know, Cell and Boo, and, you know, obviously Zamasu was immortal, all of these regenerating villains kind of took away some elements of the show. I will say it, and with the senzu beans, it does kind of make a Deus Ex Machina. It's like, okay, well, I need a senzu bean to come back to full health. Yes, that was a problem with the series, but like I said, when you're scaling everything up to such exponential heights, you have to have a way to get characters to continuously continue to fight. That is weak writing, but I will say that that's kind of what Toriyama was kind of trying to aim for. He needed to get away for characters to have a plot convenience to get out of it. It was just kind of weak at points. So I can't disagree with this too much. It's outdated. In many ways, Dragon Ball Z is a product of its time. The extreme action and outrageous hair were definitely a 90s thing. However, some parts of the show were outdated even when it aired, as these aspects look even worse in 2016. Chief among this is the infamous Mr. Popo, a black manservant to the Namekian kami. Popo's appearance as a racist caricature has barely made it for its later edits that turned him blue because they should have known better than to draw him that in the first place. Okay, first of all, you were right in saying that Dragon Ball's outdated, but it's an old show, so what the hell do you expect? Like, it's literally like me saying The Simpsons and the Flintstones is outdated. If I go back and I watch like those really early episodes, of course. It's like saying Astro Boy's outdated, because it is. And back then, the censorship changes were a lot different from what they were today, which is why they made him blue for the Nicktoons edit. That's why. Of course it's outdated, because it's old. That's stupid. Yes, I will tell you, Dragon Ball does have a lot of, you know, racial caricatures. What I will also say is, outside of Mr. Popo, Toriyama does strongly emphasize the way he draws black characters. He does strongly emphasize the way that he draws Indian characters, Native American characters, you know, East Asian, Oriental characters. Toriyama does have a very unique way that he does that. And he also over-exaggerates Aryan features like he did for General Blue. But that was also a part of Toriyama's design in certain ways, and that has to do with censorship. So yeah, it's an old show. What do you expect? Alright. Everyone old is a pervert. The world of Dragon Ball Z has a bit of weird cultural quirk. Every old person is a pervert. This is most prominent among males and almost among Goku's mentors, and they have a sense of sexual deviancy. The worst offender is the old Master Roshi, who helped transform Goku into a world-class fighter and taught him the Kamehameha. Well, I mean, Goku kind of learned it from watching Roshi just use the Kamehameha when he was firing it out the mountain, but either way, Roshi is a great role model in many senses, but it also spends most of his free time harassing women and openly reading pornography. Most charmingly, his nose habitually sprays blood whenever he's turned on. Seems appropriate for a cartoon. Okay, this is kind of a stupid point here, because, I mean, when you say everyone, but then the only example you use is Roshi, that's silly. So everyone's a pervert, but yet you only use Roshi as an example. Okay, yeah, maybe Elder Kai is too. You know, maybe there's a few perverted characters like Oolong, maybe, who's a pig, and technically Oolong's very old if you really look at how old he was throughout the series. But yeah, but it's silly because that's a part of humor, like, and it's also a part of Japanese culture. The Japanese themselves are very perverted, and I'm no expert on Japanese culture, but if you look at anime and hentai and all that stuff, they make fun of themselves for being perverted. So you're not showing knowledge of how Japanese culture is, okay? And even even in English cultures, a lot of old American men in Western cultures have often been perverted, so that's silly. Alright, it's been memed to death. Part of the issue with taking Dragon Ball Z seriously these days is that the internet has been so busy not taking it seriously for the past decade. Dragon Ball Z, more than almost any other classic anime, has been made into some seriously dank memes over the years. The famous Over 9000 bit was one of the internet's earliest memes and started to trend of making fun of Dragon Ball Z's over-the-top nature. The fabulous Dragon Ball Z Abridged series sealed the deal, and the fact that the source material barely needed to be exaggerated helped prove it was a show not to be taken seriously. Yeah, duh, because it was a show that Toriyama wrote. Toriyama's a gag writer. And when you say it's been memed to that, that's because it's a popular anime that people love. People don't meme the hell out of Yu Yu Hakusho because it's not as popular as Dragon Ball. The more popular something is, the more it's going to be memed. That's why the NBA and the NFL are always memed. That's how it is. That's why Harry Potter's always memed. I think that's silly. I think that's a very, very, very silly point. It's memed because people love it. Either way, guys, this is the second time I'm recording this video. For those of you who don't know, the first time I did this video, I talked for like 35 minutes and I was only on like number 8. I tried to speed this up for you and give you a much quicker analysis so you guys can watch this in a much more bigger fashion. And honestly, I think Stephan Roget does make some points about what he said in this, you know, when he was talking about, you know, people can heal themselves so fast. It is kind of over the top with all of the transformations. Death does mean nothing at times, but at the end of the day, I think that he's missing the point. Toriyama is not a writer that cares about a lot of that stuff. He's a gag writer, he's a funny writer, and a lot of the times, some of the stuff that he criticized in this article is what people love about Dragon Ball. People love all those transformations, people love a lot of that stuff. So at the end of the day, I think this article had some truth, but for the most part, I definitely think that this guy was definitely misinformed about a lot of the things about Dragon Ball and the Japanese culture itself. So I hope you guys liked this debunking video, and please remember to rate, comment, and subscribe. And remember, as I always say, to have a great day, guys.